Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivirachakacharya Ashtotrashata His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivirachakacharya Ashtotrashata Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki. प्रेम से को श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासति गौर भक्तवृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की नवदीप मायापुर धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की समवेत भक्तवृंद की गौर प्रेमानंदे all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious to Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 1, Genealogical Table of the Daughters of Manu, verse number 6. It's actually Tam kāmayānāṁ bhagavān uvāha yajuṣāṁ patiḥ tuṣṭāyāṁ toṣam āpanno janayad dvādaśātmajān tam kāmayānām bhagavān uvāha yajuṣāṁ patiḥ tuṣṭāyāṁ toṣam āpanno janayad dvādaśātmajān tam kāmayānām bhagavān uvāha yajuṣāṁ patiḥ tuṣṭāyāṁ toṣam āpanno janayad dvādaśātmajān. yajuṣāṁ patiḥ tuṣṭāyāṁ toṣam āpanno janayad dvādaśātmajān. Ladies. Tam kāmayānāṁ bhagavān uvāha yajuṣāṁ patiḥ tuṣṭāyāṁ toṣam āpanno janayad dvādaśātmajān. Tam, her, kāmayānāṁ, desiring, bhagavān, the Lord, uvāha, married, yajuṣāṁ, of all sacrifices, patiḥ, master, tuṣṭāyāṁ, in his wife, who was very much pleased, toṣam, great pleasure, āpannaḥ, having obtained, ajanayat, gave birth, dvādaśa, 12, ātmajān, sons. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation. The Lord of the ritualistic performance of yajña later married Dakṣiṇā, who was anxious to have the Supreme Personality of Godhead as her husband. And in this wife, the Lord was also very much pleased to beget 12 children. Purport. The ideal husband and wife are generally called Lakṣmī-Nārāyaṇa to compare them to the Lord and the goddess of fortune. For it is significant that Lakṣmī-Nārāyaṇa are forever happy as husband and wife. A wife should always remain satisfied with her husband, and a husband should always remain satisfied with his wife. In the Cāṇakya-śloka, the moral instructions of Cāṇakya Paṇḍita, it is said that if a husband and wife are always satisfied with one another, then the goddess of fortune automatically comes. In other words, where there is no disagreement between husband and wife, all material opulence is present and good children are born. Generally, according to Vedic civilization, the wife is trained to be satisfied in all conditions, and the husband, according to Vedic instruction, is required to please the wife with sufficient food, ornaments and clothing. Then, if they are satisfied with their mutual dealings, good children are born. In this way, the entire world can become peaceful. But unfortunately, in this age of Kali, there are no ideal husbands and wives. Therefore, unwanted children are produced, and there is no peace and prosperity in the present day world. Third sense of purport. Om Ajñānatimirandasya Jñānāṅ-janāṣalākaya Chakshur-ulmitam Ena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the translation goes as, the Lord of the ritualistic performance, yajña, later married Dakṣiṇā, who was anxious to have the Supreme Personality of Godhead as her husband. And in this wife, the Lord was also very much pleased to beget 12 children. What is the relationship between yajña and Dakṣiṇā before they were married? Yeah, you see the problem there? So actually yajña and Dakṣiṇā were brother and sister. You didn't realize it? Yeah. If you remember, actually they were both born to to Ruchi. But however, the Manu wanted to have the son, because he is a Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he requested that you can marry my daughter, but I want the son to be with me. But later on, they didn't give. I mean, they have two children, not just one child. So Ruchi kept the daughter, but the Manu took the elder son, whose name was Yajña. So, and this verse state that the Yajña later actually married Dakṣiṇā. Technically speaking, actually they are both brother and sister. So this, yeah, you can summarize. So this, from a material point of view, this could be something which is bewildering to understand, right? I mean, it also seems to be quite immoral of such an act. But and interestingly, I'm not sure why, but Prabhupada also actually does not address this in his purport. He mentions about an ideal wife and ideal husband, but he does not talk about this issue. But however, there are some explanations to understand this. If you go back to the verse number 4 of the same chapter, it is described that actually Dakṣiṇā she is a partial incarnation of goddess of fortune. So she is not like an ordinary person. She is actually Lakṣmī herself. She is described as a partial incarnation of Lakṣmī. And of course, Yajña is the Supreme Lord himself. So in this way, so these are not like ordinary human beings, but they are actually Lakṣmī and Nārayaṇ themselves appearing for Rucha, the sage Rucha. So as we all know that whenever the Supreme Lord appears, the Lord also appears along with his internal potency, in various ways, like either as Mother Sita or as Srimati Radharani. So the Lord always comes along with his internal energy. And there is an explanation given by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his book Sri Navadvipa Bhavataranga. In this book, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions that the Lord's Leelas in different kalpas manifest the same principle in various relations as husband and wife, friend and friend, brother and sister, but the Tattva remains one, the eternal unity of Sri Bhagavan and Srimati, his Shakti. So the Lord even always appears along with his Shakti, but it's not always that this relationship between the apparent material relationship is not always as a husband and wife. Just as in the case of Lord Ram and Sita, they appeared as husband and wife, but that may not be applicable all the time. Sometimes the Lord and his Shakti may appear in an unconventional relation. And this is one example given here. Can any of you think of any other relation how the Lord and his energy has appeared? Can any of you think of any other examples when the Lord appeared not as husband and wife but any other relationship? Which one? Not Jagannath, this Gadadhar Pandit, Gaur Gadadhar. Yes, of course. Yeah. Any other example? Okay, what is the relation there? Okay, so here specifically what it is mentioned, some of the examples mentioned by Bhaktivinoda Thakur is Jagannath and Subhadra. So what is the relationship between Jagannath and Subhadra? When they appear in this pastime, they are basically brother and sisters. But however, actually Subhadra is nothing but, she is a personification of the Yogamaya potency, right? But however, for that pastime, they both actually appeared as brother and sister. And interestingly enough, actually Arjuna married Subhadra, right? I mean, that could be even more bewildering. Like, how can personification of Yogamaya potency can marry Arjuna? Because Arjuna, he's a Jiva Tattva, right? But however, here in this pastime, we see that actually Arjuna was marrying Subhadra. How do you understand that? I mean, it is nothing surprising, because when we try to understand this pastime, actually even though Arjuna is a Jiva, but he is a Nityasiddha, he is an eternal associate of the Lord. And if you look at Vaikuntha or Goloka, there also you have Gopas and Gopis, right? And the Gopas, they marry Gopis, but ultimately the Gopis are nothing but expansions of the internal potency of the Lord. So in that way, it is nothing to bewilder that that why is that the Lord is appearing in this relationship and trying to understand the intricacies of that kind of those pastimes. And the other example, as Prabhu mentioned, is Gaur Gadadhar. So Gaur Gadadhar also is Gadadhar Pandit. He is basically incarnation of Srimati Radharani herself. But they did not appear as wife and husband. They appeared as he's a male friend and a partner. So in this way, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that sometimes the Lord and his energy may appear in an unconventional relationships, but we don't need to find any fault in such relationships because it's a Lord, and the Lord is transcendental, and his relationships are not mundane material relationships which are applicable in our case. And there are further explanations given by the previous acharyas where it says, like, one example is Srila Sridhara Swami says that although Dakṣiṇā was his sister, there is no fault, na doshaha, because he is bhagavān. And even Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that he accepted Dakṣiṇā as wife, but this was only a divine pastime or lila, and not a worldly relationship. So in this way, when we try to understand the pastimes of the Lord, we must understand some fundamental things, that the Lord is transcendental and he is not subjected to any of our material dharma or material relationships according to our understanding, and we cannot superimpose our material standards onto the Lord. So this is something we need to understand. And the next subject which Prabhupada actually spends most of the purport is in understanding the relationship between a husband and wife, or especially how an ideal wife and how an ideal husband should be. And some of the statements Prabhupada makes in the purport are: a wife should always remain satisfied with her husband, and the husband should always remain satisfied with his wife. So the important point here is that both should be satisfied with each other, right? Because for the husband and wife to have a proper relationship, they should not be dissatisfied. They should be satisfied with each other. So that's one of the important principles we need to understand. And if you look at the Vedic marriage system, it's a long ritualistic process, and at one stage the priest asks the husband and wife to make a promise, and this is one of the mantra which both the partners recite. It is said, dharmecha artecha kamecha nāti. Most of you may be familiar with this thing, because in most of the marriages this vow is made, dharmecha artecha kameta nāti. What it means is that the husband and wife both are making a promise. What is a promise? Dharmecha means in following dharma, artecha means in acquiring wealth, and kamecha means fulfilling one's desires, nāti, which means that let's cooperate with each other, because that's a promise a husband and wife are making during the time of marriage. Because in the Vedic tradition there are purusharthas. Purusharthas means there are the ultimate goals in a more traditional sense. What it means, what are they? Dharma, artha, kama and moksha. So these are the purusharthas which a human being is trying to achieve. And when a person gets married, the same purusharthas are still being achieved, but now in cooperation. Now you have a partner in achieving those purusharthas. And the goal is that both the husband and wife cooperate with each other in order to achieve these purusharthas. And interestingly, if you try to understand the further intricacies of how these purusharthas and how this cooperation work in marriage, it is mentioned that actually whatever piety the husband acquires, the 50% of the piety actually goes to the wife without any separate endeavor. Because of this promise what they have made, that any endeavor made on the side of the husband or wife, they equally share the benefit. So that is why it is mentioned that, like for example, if a husband goes to the higher planets after leaving the body, due to the ritualistic ceremonies whatever the husband may be performing, and the wife automatically follows the husband to that higher planetary systems as a right, and even though without doing any separate endeavor, because they share half the piety which is acquired through those ritualistic practices. And this is done because of the cooperation rendered by the wife to the husband. And then, but however, Now the question can be raised, what if the husband is not qualified? Right? I mean, that's an obvious question anybody can ask. What if, okay, as a wife, let's say I am rendering my service, but what if the husband is not qualified? What happens then? Do I still get my benefit, or do I not get my benefit? If you look at some of the examples, for example, the wife of the demons, who are outright, they are like certified demons. Like, you don't need to certify; they are already certified demons, right? Yeah. And if you look at their wives, and for example, if you look at the case of Hiranyakashipu, whose wife was Kayadu, right? And there are some interesting statements made in this regard, that even if a husband is not qualified, but when a wife performs her Sri Dharma or her duty, she still gets the benefit because she has done her part. And of course, things get even more interesting when a husband and wife becomes a devotee. I will explain that later on. But in the 7th canto, 7th chapter, verse number 10, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mentions that although she saw the sinful nature of her husband, Kayadu did not protest or abandon him, knowing that everything is moving under the control of Supreme Lord. Because if you remember, actually the husband is not only demonic in one sense, but also he was actually torturing his son, Prahlad Maharaj. Of course, if that has to happen now, it will be there will be a criminal case, right? But of course, these are the examples from a different time. And in that situation, we can see that somebody may be surprised that how is that Kayadu, knowing that the husband is demonic and knowing that he is torturing the son who is pure devotee of the Lord, how is that she is still staying with that such a husband? That's an extreme example, but still the explanation is given that because see, Kayadu is also not an ordinary woman. If you remember, she was under the shelter of Narada Muni when Hiranyakashipu was performing the austerities, and she was a devotee, and she has full confidence in the protection by the Supreme Lord. So even though she is suffering in one side because of what's happening with the husband and the son, but she is also fully surrendered to the Lord, and she is confident that Lord Vishnu is protecting her son. And on top of that, even Prahlad Maharaj himself says that, my dear mother, do not lament for the demons killed by Vishnu. All beings come and go according to their karma. So in this way, we can see the examples of the exalted personalities, where even though apparently the husband is not qualified, but still by performing the Sri Dharma, those women got the benefit what they deserve. And of course, in the contemporary times, one example what I can think of is actually Srila Prabhupada's sister. I'm not sure how many of you know, but Srila Prabhupada's sister herself, her name is, the name of Srila Prabhupada's sister, anyone? Pishima. Yeah, so Pishima was the name of Srila Prabhupada's sister, and even she had a lot of challenges in her family life with her husband. And she used to often come to Prabhupada and she used to express her troubles. But Prabhupada used to always encourage her and support her. But of course they were not separated, but she used to tolerate. And it is, if you read more about her life, at the end of the life, actually the husband transforms himself and falls at the feet of Pishima for forgiveness. So in this way we can see the examples of those chaste ladies, even though the husbands are not qualified, but by the power of their chastity they were able to transform and ultimately derive the benefit what they deserve. So and as far as serving the husband goes, we have seen the example in the previous chapters in the Canto 3 about Devahuti and Kardama, right? Because Devahuti also, we can see how Devahuti was cooperating or helping her husband in his practices. And ultimately how even she got benefited from such practice, right? Because even Kardama Muni, being pleased with her service, gave her both material and spiritual benefits. And but one interesting thing is that if you go back to this Vedic verse, it is said, Dharmecha artecha kāmecha nāti charami. Do you see something missing here? What about moksha? Right? Why is moksha missing from this statement? Is it like a typo or is it like something missing? No, it is not missing. The reason is because dharma, artha and kama are something a husband and wife performs together in cooperation, but as far as moksha is concerned, that is individual. Moksha is an individual business. Just because a husband is getting moksha doesn't mean that the wife gets moksha because of this. No, moksha, everybody has to strive for their own moksha. That is why if you see Mother Devahuti also, Devahuti served Kardama Muni very nicely and then she got the benefit. But however, when Kardama Muni left the house, she continued her spiritual practice under the guidance of the son Kapila. Because Kapila has to instruct Mother Devahuti on the transcendental knowledge and then she got liberated. So there is no shortcut for liberation. One has to do one's own endeavor for liberation, and liberation is a personal business. One has to do one's own practice, strive one's own, get rid out of all the material contaminations and surrender to the Supreme Lord in order to become liberated. But this may or may not apply in the case of devotees, because in the 7th canto, 11th chapter, it is mentioned that the woman who engages in the service of her husband, following strictly in the footsteps of the goddess of fortune, surely returns home back to Godhead with her devotee husband and lives happily in the Vaikuntha planets. You see here, on one side you see the Vedic mantra, it is said that moksha is not included, but in this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that no, actually the wife will go along with the husband, right? So the understanding is very simple here. The understanding is that this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is applicable only to the devotees. Because this is an advantage. This is an advantage when a husband and wife both are devotees, that they are not only just following the Varnashrama principles, but also there is a spiritual benefit as also. Because when a husband is serving a wife, especially both are devotees, they are not only just following the Sri Dharma or Purusha Dharma, but they are also serving a devotee of the Lord. And there is a spiritual benefit derived out of such service. So that is why in the Bhagavatam, it is mentioned here that when a husband and wife both are devotees, and when they serve each other, they both are liberated together. So this is one unique thing. That is why, it is important, or a person is very fortunate to have one's partner to be a devotee. And then Prabhupada further goes on to say that generally, according to Vedic civilization, the wife is trained to be satisfied in all conditions, and the husband, according to the Vedic instruction, is required to please the wife with sufficient food, ornaments and clothing. There is I came across one person, he made something, he told me something which is kind of bewildering for me. He told that there's a husband and wife and they keep fighting a lot actually. Both are devotees, but they fight a lot. And one day I asked him, what is the problem? Why do you guys fight so much, And funnily he said one thing, that Prabhuji, actually sometimes fighting is good. Why fighting is good? Because when you fight, you suffer. When you suffer, then you pray for Krishna more. Right? And also Krishna said that 4 types of people approach him. Out of it, one person is, one person who is suffering. So what is the problem? Let's fight now. Let's fight. Let's suffer, and let's pray to Krishna more. Right? So it sounds to be logical, and in one sense. But what is the problem? What is the problem in suffering and approaching Krishna? Do you see any problem with such an approach or such an understanding? Because ultimately we must understand that, whatever practice we do as a practicing devotees, we follow in the footsteps of our previous acharyas, right? Whatever our previous acharyas set up, we follow in their footsteps, and especially we are known as Rupanugas, means followers of Srila Rupa Goswami. And our practice of bhakti and our practice of sadhana is following in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami, and especially the instructions given by him in the book Nectar of Devotion. In Nectar of Devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami makes an interesting statement where he says that dukkādi sambhavat bhaktihi prayopa rudaha chetasam na bhavati tata tasmin sukhanandadi mohite. Means, generally whose minds are overwhelmed by excessive suffering cannot take to bhakti, nor those who are deluded by excessive happiness and pleasure. So yes, suffering is sometimes okay, or suffering is sometimes good to surrender to Krishna, but excessive suffering is actually not good. Excessive suffering or excessive happiness actually disqualifies a person from following the path of bhakti. Because when a person is overly suffering, actually, he cannot really stay stable on the path of bhakti. He cannot stay in a stable bhakti. For him, the best is actually to practice, jnana yoga, or, develop excessive detachments. Because of too much suffering or too much of a mental trauma a person is undergoing, for him, he cannot remain stable on bhakti. He has, because for a person to be on a path of bhakti, there needs to be some kind of stability. But where a person is overly suffering, he cannot be stable on the path of bhakti, because he is just not in a normal condition of mind state. So some normalcy is required, some kind of a normalcy is required, a person who is practicing the bhakti yoga path. And at the same time, at the other extreme also, when a person is too much into sense gratification, for him also to practice bhakti yoga is very difficult. For him, the best is to practice karma yoga. Do your things, but just offer your results to Krishna, because he's just too much into sense gratification. So for a person to practice bhakti, some kind of a normalcy and some kind of a balance is required. So that is why we must make sure that, suffering is good, but too much suffering is not good. That is what Srila Rupa Goswami mentions in Nectar of Devotion. And we must understand that, this vairagya, see, even though being a bhakti yogi we practice renunciation, but how we practice renunciation is also very much important. That also we follow in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami. And what it is said is that anukulyasa sankalpa pratikulyasa varjanam. Because see, in general, based on the type of practice you adopt, like a jnana yogi, the more the renunciation, the more is good. Like, the more better he is, the more advanced he is in jnana yoga. But in bhakti yoga, it doesn't work like that. In bhakti yoga, it is mentioned that anukulyasa sankalpa pratikulyasa varjanam means there is nothing wrong in accepting those things which are favorable to bhakti, actually. So vairagya does not mean in bhakti yoga that you have to give up. It's not like that. If something is useful for you, to practice bhakti yoga, there is nothing wrong in accepting those things in moderation. And at the same time, we have to reject those things which are not favorable to one's bhakti. And this is how a person following in the bhakti yoga practices renunciation. So, accepting things is nothing wrong in bhakti yoga as far as it is helpful in practicing one's bhakti. But sometimes it may so happen that a devotee, especially in this Kali Yuga, sometimes he is put in an awkward situation where he is not able to make even the basic needs in a dignified way. It's possible, because we are living in a society which are ruled by demons, and there is no way a person can have a decent life and earn a decent money, even though a devotee may not be over ambitious or may not be trying to become a millionaire. Even to have a decent life sometimes becomes challenging for a devotee, and sometimes a devotee is put in awkward situations, especially in the Kali Yuga, and sometimes he may end up doing things out of desperation or taking up those occupations which are not really befitting a devotee. So this is a practical challenge many devotees may face in the current times. And for that also, actually, we do have some instructions from the acharyas how to deal with such a situation. That what to do when a devotee is not able to make a basic living in a decent way and follow his dharma. So there are some statements which I found interesting. As you can see here, Brahmanaha Shudraha Vrutyapi Jivet Apadi Dukkitaha, where it is said that sometimes in a distressing conditions, a Brahmana may sometimes even take the occupation of a Shudra in order to survive. But however, when that extreme situation subsides, when the crisis ends, one must resume one's own true dharma. That it's okay sometimes that out of desperation, out of an awkward situation, that a devotee may perform those duties which are not befitting a devotee just for the sake of survival. But however, a person should not become comfortable or continue in that kind of an occupation. But whenever the normalcy resumes, he has to take up those occupations which are befitting for a devotee. And also there is a statement in the Nectar of Devotion also, where Rupa Goswami says that among the regular worldly or Vedic duties, one may sometimes act in a particular way when such an act can be used for the worship of Lord Hari, but if that act has no connection with his worship, one should desist from it. So sometimes, of course, this is even more strict. Actually, Rupa Goswami is not even talking about survival. He is talking that, okay, even if you want to do something, if that activity has nothing to do with directly or indirectly with Krishna, then don't do that. Or, even if you do it, okay, there are two things here. The first thing is that if it has something to do with, the Lord, or the worship of the Lord Hari, then do it even though it may not suit your dharma. But however, if there is no connection to your worship, then just better stay from that kind of an occupational duties. So these are some of the practical examples how to deal with these instructions, because see, on one hand we can give ideal instructions, but on the other hand we must also be practical implementation also required. So both are required, not just high philosophy, right? We also need to look into the practical sides. And the acharyas have given both sides, how to deal with those practical challenges also. And further Prabhupada states that in this way, the entire world can become peaceful, but unfortunately in the age of Kali, there are no ideal husbands and wife, therefore unwanted children are produced and there is no peace and prosperity in the present day. So here we can see the unfortunate situation where, because these principles does not exist any longer, that the result is that there are unwanted children. But however, if one follows one's dharma, if you look at the purport, just by cooperation itself, it can bring material prosperity. You see, you don't have to strive separately. But on the other hand, when there is no cooperation, there are some adverse effects, and the biggest adverse effect is that there is Varna Sankara or unwanted population. Right? And there is further statement in this regards. In the previous chapter, it is mentioned that because of lust, anger or greed, when a man and woman unite without a spiritual purpose, the soul is bound again in the material existence. So ultimately we must see that it is not just material cooperation or some kind of a material arrangement. Behind everything, ultimately there has to be some kind of a spiritual purpose. Otherwise, without spiritual purpose, even though a person may be happy materially, but that doesn't really bring any benefit actually, because a person may be happy materially, but and engaging with a woman out of lust, anger or greed, but such a thing can only produce a soul which is again bound up in the cycle of birth and death. So ultimately there has to be a spiritual purpose behind all those activities, but on the other hand we must also make sure that the Varnashrama principles or the cooperation are done as much as possible. And I have also explained some of the practical ways we can deal with those awkward situations. Okay, any comments or questions? Rabindranath.
Yeah, you mentioned how in Vedic literature a wife, her husband was a demon, but she stayed there and served him like that. But Srila Prabhupada also gave, in the Bhagavatam, he mentions that situation. He says, if the husband is fallen, she should separate from him. And Prabhupada defines fallen as breaking the four regulator principles.
Yeah, so Archita Prabhu actually mentioned, long time back, I had a discussion with him. So my understanding of that instruction from Prabhupada is that sometimes it so happens that a wife wants to take up Bhakti Yoga seriously, but a husband is not cooperative or completely, atheistic or demonic, where she is not congenial for her to take up the, practice properly. In that situation, what Archita Prabhu mentioned, what I believe, is that Prabhupada didn't tell to, when they say Prabhupada leave, he didn't mean divorce. That's what my understanding is. He meant to say that.
He says there shouldn't be no divorce, but
exactly.
He said separate from him.
Right, exactly.
But he says that the woman should not remarry again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the instruction. Yeah, that is the instruction what I heard. Yes. Yeah. Right. So yeah, of course, that is more of a practical approach, because here this example I've given of Kayadu may be an extreme example, more ideal example, which may or may not be practical in one sense. So definitely we have to follow in the instructions by the acharyas how this can be followed practically, and I would agree, that this is in line with my understanding as well. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. You mentioned if someone has excessive suffering, they can't practice bhakti, but what if like a devotee gets attacked or something and they have like a severe injury, like they can't do bhakti?
Well, it is because, see, when you say extreme suffering, this extreme suffering is also not like an absolute thing, right? Everybody has a different appetite to handle suffering, right? So some people, so my level of tolerance may be different from your level of tolerance, right? So the point is that as long as one person is able to keep his sanity, right, that is more important. As long as a person is able to be a sane person, that is an ideal platform to practice bhakti. Some sanity is required. That's what it basically means, nothing more than that. So it can vary from person to person. So yes, sometimes it so happens that when a person goes to extreme emotional traumas, for him, there is so much of damage, psychologically, that, he just can't be sane at all. Like no matter what you try, it's just very difficult for some people to be sane. So that time, they will need more, guidance and, more practice. It is, and we see it also. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for a nice class. I have a question regarding what you mentioned and what our Prabhu here talked about, the issue of divorce, that it's the wife's duty to separate from a husband who has stopped following the regulative principles or committed sin, like being violent, whatever. Is it also a sin if that wife pursues her dream to beget a child, even with modern technology like IVF or sperm donations? And is it also a sin if that person becomes a mother and then decides to remarry so that she can have protection for herself and her son?
Yeah, so these are the practical challenges which we find in the current day and age. So for these kind of more specific questions, what I would actually suggest is that it depends upon that is why we have a guru. I mean, I would actually leave it to one's own guru in deciding what is best for his disciple in their advancement in the spiritual life. So because some things cannot be like generalized as such, sometimes it can be like case to case basis. So in those situations, it is best left to one's own guru to decide what is best for his disciple actually.
Should such a person be considered an outcast to the mainstream society?
Ma'am, I don't see a reason why to do like that, but
thank you.
No, I don't see any reason for that, but yeah, I mean, as a devotees, we all should always, cooperate and help each other. There's no doubt about that. Okay. So, should we end or should we? Okay, yeah, so we can end the class here, and if you have questions, we can follow up after the class, okay? Thank you all very much. Nitashimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.